The crystalline walls of the Galactic Council chamber stretched upward like frozen lightning, catching and splitting the light from 1,000 distant stars. Marcus Chen stood in the center of the circular room, his hands bound behind his back with energy restraints that hummed softly against his wrists. Around him, seated on floating platforms that circled the chamber like vultures, sat the representatives of 43 different species. None of them were human. Marcus kept his face neutral as he watched Judge Arbitrator Velshara glide forward on her methane-filled suspension pod. The Krell's triple eyes regarded him with something that looked like disgust, though Marcus had learned over the years that reading alien expressions was mostly guesswork. Her translator box crackled to life, filling the chamber with her verdict. Captain Marcus Chen of the species designated human, from the planet Earth, you have been found guilty of violating the Non-Interference Directive. Section 4, Paragraph 12. You did willfully and knowingly interfere with the lawful business transactions of registered merchants, resulting in the loss of valuable cargo and significant financial damages. Marcus almost laughed. Valuable cargo. They meant the Varani refugees that the slavers had packed into cargo containers like animals. Men, women, and children who would have been sold to mining operations in the outer colonies. But he kept his mouth shut. He had already said everything he needed to say during the trial. Velshara continued, her voice taking on a formal tone that echoed through the chamber. The council has deliberated for 3 cycles. We find that your actions, while perhaps motivated by what your species considers moral reasoning, cannot be excused. The stability of galactic commerce depends upon the respect of established laws. Your species has a documented history of violence and emotional decision-making. You have proven this assessment correct. In the observation gallery above, Ambassador Kira Okonkwo gripped the railing hard enough to hurt. She had fought against this for weeks, calling in every favor she had earned in her 15 years of diplomatic service. It had not been enough. The Council feared humanity's growing influence, feared the way humans seemed to reject the careful bureaucracy that kept the galactic community functioning. They wanted to make an example, and Marcus had given them the perfect opportunity. The sentence is exile, Velshara announced. You will be transported to the planetary body designated Tartarus 9, a Class X Deathworld in the outer reaches. You will be provided with basic survival equipment and left to face the consequences of your actions. May your fate serve as a warning to others who would disrupt the peace of our galactic society. A murmur ran through the assembled representatives. Even by council standards, this was harsh. Tartarus 9 had a reputation. It was where the council sent criminals they wanted to forget about. The automated monitoring systems recorded an average survival time of 14 hours. The record was 3 days, held by a Kravik warrior who had killed his clan leader in ritual combat. Marcus finally allowed himself a small smile. See you in a year. The chamber fell silent. Several translators made confused noises, as if they were not sure they had processed the human's words correctly. Velshara's pod drifted closer, her eyes narrowing. You do not understand the nature of your sentence, she said slowly, as if speaking to a child. Tartarus 9 is classified as incompatible with carbon-based life. The atmospheric pressure alone would crush most species. The predators that inhabit the surface are unlike anything your primitive world has produced. You will not survive the first night. Marcus met her gaze without blinking. Ma'am, with all due respect, my species evolved on a planet that has been trying to kill us since we climbed down from the trees. We've got snakes that can drop an elephant with one bite, spiders the size of dinner plates, jellyfish that make you wish you were dead, and weather that goes from drought to flood without warning. And that's just Australia. He smiled wider. You're going to need a better execution method. Velshara made a sound like steam escaping from a pressure valve. Remove him. 2 security guards, members of the insectoid threne species, moved forward to take Marcus by the arms. He did not resist as they led him out of the chamber. As he passed the observation gallery, he caught Ambassador Okonkwo's eye and gave her a slight nod. She looked like she wanted to cry. He hoped she would not. He was not worth tears. The processing center was cold and efficient. They stripped him of his captain's uniform, the one he had worn for 12 years hauling cargo across the frontier systems. They gave him standard exile equipment, a thermal bodysuit, a multi-tool knife, a fire starter, basic medical supplies, water purification tablets. and a survival kit that looked like it had been designed by someone who had never actually needed to survive anything. They let him keep his dog tags and his wedding ring, not out of kindness but because the regulations did not specifically forbid personal items with no survival value. "You got family?" one of the Threen guards asked as he sealed the equipment pack. His translator gave him a buzzing accent that Marcus had always found oddly friendly. "Had a wife," Marcus said, checking the knife's edge. "Died 6 years ago. Mining accident on Kepler 442b, no kids. My sister's on Earth, but we haven't spoken in a decade." The guard made a clicking sound that might have been sympathy. "The pod will have enough air for the descent. After that, you're on your own. The monitoring satellites will track your life signs for the records, but no one's coming to get you. You understand?" "Yeah, I understand." Marcus finished his inspection of the gear. It was cheap but functional. He had worked with worse. Question though, what happens if someone actually survives? Like, hypothetically speaking? The guard's antennae twitched in what Marcus recognized as the Threen equivalent of a laugh. "In 300 years, no one ever has. But according to the old laws, if you survive one full solar cycle of the designated world, your sentence is considered served. You'd be free to go." He paused. "It's never happened." "First time for everything," Marcus said. They loaded him into the automated exile pod an hour later. It was a coffin-sized metal tube with a single viewport and enough life support for the 48-hour journey to Tartarus 9. Marcus strapped himself into the acceleration couch and watched through the viewport as Unity 7 station slowly fell away beneath him. Somewhere on that station, Ambassador Okonkwo was probably filing protests that would be ignored. Somewhere else, Velshara was celebrating the removal of another troublesome human from the galactic stage. The pod's navigation system engaged, and the stars wheeled around him as the automated pilot oriented toward the outer reaches. Marcus closed his eyes and let his mind drift back to the moment that had landed him here. The distress call had come through on a standard commercial frequency. A Varani passenger ship requesting assistance with engine failure. Marcus had been 3 days from Unity 7 with a hold full of mining equipment, running behind schedule and low on fuel. The smart play would have been to forward the distress call to the nearest patrol and keep moving. But when he had arrived at the coordinates, he had found not a passenger ship, but a slaver vessel, and the Varani were not passengers, but cargo. He had known immediately what he was looking at. The slave trade was technically illegal in Council space, but enforcement was lax in the frontier systems. The merchants claimed they were simply facilitating labor contracts. The Varani, bound and terrified in cargo containers with minimal life support, told a different story. Marcus had made his choice in about 3 seconds. He had opened a direct channel to the slaver captain, informed him that he was in violation of about 16 different laws, and given him 5 minutes to release the Varani. The slaver captain had laughed and told him to mind his own business. So Marcus had targeted the slaver ship's engine housing with his cargo hauler's cutting laser and sliced it in half. He had transferred the Varani to his own ship, called in the coordinates to Council Patrol, and continued on his way. He had thought that would be the end of it. He should have known better. The slaver captain had connections, and the Council had been looking for an excuse to rein in human independence. Marcus Chen, hero to refugees and criminal to bureaucrats, had given them that excuse. The pod shuddered as it entered faster-than-light transit. Marcus opened his eyes and stared at the distorted starlight streaming past the viewport. He had 3 days to prepare himself mentally for whatever waited on Tartarus 9. 3 days to remember everything his grandfather had taught him about survival in the Australian outback. 3 days to recall his training in the Earth Marines, before he had retired and become a cargo hauler. 3 days to convince himself that he actually wanted to live through this. He thought about the Varani refugees. They had made it to safety, according to the last message he had received before his arrest. 37 souls who would see their families again, who would not die in darkness at the bottom of an asteroid mine. That was worth something. That was worth a lot, actually. "All right, Tartarus 9, Marcus said to the empty pod. "Let's see what you've got." The automated pilot did not respond, but somewhere in the depths of the navigation computer, a countdown timer ticked steadily towards 0. In 71 hours and 43 minutes, Marcus Chen would either begin the fight of his life or die trying. Given his choice, he preferred the first option. The pod hummed through the darkness between stars, carrying its lone passenger toward a world that had killed everyone who had ever set foot on its surface. But Marcus Chen was not everyone. He was human, and humans had a gift for surviving things they should not survive. It was practically their species-defining trait. He allowed himself a grin in the darkness of the pod. The council thought they were executing him. They had no idea they were about to learn a very important lesson about humanity. You could kill a human, sure. Humans died all the time. But if you wanted to make sure a human stayed dead, you had better check the body, because if you just assumed they were gone and walked away, there was a better-than-average chance they would come back angry. Velshara and her council were about to discover what Earth's worst had already learned. Humans were not the biggest predators in the galaxy, or the strongest, or the fastest. But they were the most stubborn, and sometimes stubbornness was the only survival trait that really mattered. The pod's computer chimed softly, announcing that the first day of travel was complete. 2 more days until Tartarus 9. Marcus closed his eyes and began to plan. The pod hit atmosphere like a hammer striking an anvil. Marcus gritted his teeth as the entire vessel shook violently, the heat shields glowing cherry red through the small viewport. The automated systems had dropped him during what the data packet called Tartarus 9's calm season. Though Marcus suspected the definition of calm was relative when it came to Deathworlds. The altimeter spun downward at a terrifying rate, numbers blurring as the pod screamed through clouds that glowed an ugly yellow-green in the double sunlight. 3,000 meters. 2,000. 1,000. The retro rockets fired at 500 meters, barely enough to keep the pod from becoming a crater. Marcus felt his stomach lurch as the descent turned from controlled fall to barely controlled crash. Trees exploded beneath the pod's impact, and then everything went sideways as the vessel bounced, rolled, and finally slammed into something solid enough to stop its momentum. For a long moment, Marcus just sat there taking inventory. Both arms worked. Both legs responded. Ribs felt intact, head hurt like hell, but his vision was clear. Not bad for a crash landing on a planet that wanted him dead. The pod's emergency systems hissed as they equalized pressure with the outside atmosphere. Red lights flashed a warning that external conditions were hostile, as if that was news to anyone. Marcus unstrapped himself from the acceleration couch and hit the manual release on the hatch. It blew outward with a bang, and the smell of Tartarus 9 rolled in like a wave. It was thick, heavy with moisture and something organic that reminded him of rotting fruit mixed with burning metal. The air tasted acidic on his tongue. He pulled his scarf up over his nose and mouth before climbing out. His first thought was that whoever named this place Tartarus had been overly dramatic. His second thought was that maybe they had not been dramatic enough. The jungle stretched in every direction, a nightmare landscape of twisted vegetation that glowed with bioluminescent patches of blue and sickly purple. The trees were massive, their trunks wider than the pod and covered in what looked like black scales. Vines hung between them like cables, some as thick as Marcus's leg, others thin as wire and moving slightly in the wind. Or maybe they were moving on their own. It was hard to tell. The ground was spongy beneath his boots, covered in a carpet of moss that released spores when he stepped on it. Marcus watched the tiny particles float upward and made a mental note to avoid breathing them if possible. Everything here probably wanted to kill him in some creative way. The temperature was hot, maybe 40 degrees Celsius, and the humidity was close to 100%. His bodysuit immediately began working overtime to keep him from cooking in his own sweat. Marcus pulled his gear from the pod and did a quick check. Everything had survived the crash. Small miracle. He strapped the knife to his belt, slung the pack over his shoulders, and took a moment to survey his surroundings more carefully. The pod had carved a path through the jungle about 50 meters long, leaving a trail of broken vegetation and scorched earth. Smoke rose from several small fires where the heat shields had ignited the local plant life. That was going to be a problem. The crash site was visible from orbit, and while no one was coming to rescue him, the smoke would attract attention from anything that hunted by sight. Marcus needed to move, and fast. He checked his compass. It spun uselessly, the magnetic field of this planet apparently too chaotic for simple navigation. Great. He would have to navigate by the suns once he figured out their patterns. For now, he just needed to find shelter and water. The survival manual said Tartarus 9 had a day-night cycle of roughly 30 hours. That gave him maybe 12 hours before dark, and he did not want to meet whatever came out at night without some kind of defensible position. Marcus chose a direction at random and started walking. The jungle fought him for every meter. Vines caught at his legs and arms. The spongy ground tried to pull his boots off with every step. Branches hung low enough that he had to duck constantly, and more than once he walked face first into sticky webs that made his skin crawl. He hoped they were just webs and not something worse. He had been walking for maybe 20 minutes when he heard the first sound that made him stop completely. It was a low thrumming noise, rhythmic and deep enough to feel in his chest. It came from somewhere ahead and to his left. Marcus froze, his hand going to the knife at his belt. The thrumming continued for another 10 seconds, then stopped. The jungle went completely silent. That silence lasted exactly 3 heartbeats. Then something screamed. It was not a human sound. It was not anything Marcus had ever heard before. It started low and climbed higher, like metal tearing combined with the shriek of an angry cat scaled up 1,000 times. And it was getting closer. Marcus ran. He crashed through the undergrowth, not caring about stealth anymore, just putting distance between himself and whatever was making that noise. Behind him, he heard trees snapping. Something big was moving fast. Something very big. He broke into a small clearing and immediately wished he had not. The ground here was different, darker, almost black. His boot hit it and sank in up to his ankle. Not ground, mud, or something like mud. He yanked his foot free and stumbled forward just as something massive burst from the tree line behind him. Marcus got his first look at a ripper worm, and his brain took a moment to process what it was seeing. 6 legs, each ending in claws the length of his forearm. A body like an oversized bear covered in overlapping plates of dark chitin. A head that was mostly mouth filled with rows of serrated teeth designed for tearing. And eyes. Too many eyes arranged in clusters on either side of its skull, all of them locked on him. The creature charged across the clearing, and Marcus did the only thing that made sense. He ran straight at it. The ripper worm clearly had not expected that. It tried to adjust its attack, but momentum was not its friend. Marcus dropped into a slide at the last second, passing under the creature's body as its jaws snapped shut on empty air. He felt claws rake across his back, but the bodysuit held. He came out of the slide on the other side, rolled to his feet and kept running. Behind him, the ripper worm crashed into the mud with a sound like thunder. Marcus did not look back. He could hear it thrashing, its claws scrabbling for purchase in the thick sludge. Good. Maybe it would drown. He did not stop running until his lungs were burning and his legs felt like jelly. When he finally stopped, bent over with his hands on his knees, he was at the base of a cliff face. The rock was the same dark material as everything else on this planet, but it looked solid. More importantly, about 10 meters up the cliff face was the mouth of a cave. It was not much, maybe 2 meters wide, but it was shelter. And right now, shelter was worth more than gold. Marcus studied the cliff face for a moment, mapping out his route. The rock was rough with plenty of handholds. He had done harder climbs during his training. Of course, that training had not taken place on a planet trying to kill him while wearing a pack full of survival gear. But complaining would not make things easier. He started climbing. His muscles protested every meter, still sore from the crash landing and the sprint through the jungle. Halfway up, his foot slipped on a patch of slime coating the rock. He caught himself with his fingers, feeling his nails dig into the stone, and found a new foothold. Keep moving. Do not think about the fall. Do not think about what might be waiting at the bottom. He pulled himself over the lip of the cave entrance and collapsed for a moment, breathing hard. The cave was shallow, maybe 5 meters deep, but the back wall was solid rock. More importantly, it was dry. The floor was covered in a layer of fine dust that puffed up when he crawled inside. Nothing living as far as he could tell. No bones, no nests, no signs of habitation. Either nothing used this cave or whatever had used it was long gone. Marcus dragged himself to the back wall and let his pack slide off his shoulders. Every muscle in his body was screaming. His back stung where the ripper worm had clawed him, but when he checked, the bodysuit had only been torn, not penetrated. He could patch it later. For now, he needed to secure the cave entrance and then rest. He spent the next hour working. First, he used his multi-tool to cut several thick vines from near the cave mouth. They were tough as steel cables, but flexible. He wove them into a rough barrier that would not stop anything determined, but might give him warning if something tried to enter. Then he gathered rocks from around the cave and stacked them near the entrance, creating ammunition for throwing. Primitive, but effective. As the twin suns began to sink toward the horizon, Marcus allowed himself to break out one of his ration bars and some water. The ration bar tasted like cardboard mixed with disappointment, but it was calories and that was all that mattered. The water was better, still cold from the purification system in his pack. He let himself drink more than he probably should have, knowing that finding water sources would be one of his first priorities tomorrow. Outside the cave, the jungle was changing. The bioluminescent patches on the trees were glowing brighter as the natural light faded. New sounds emerged, calls and cries from creatures waking up for the night shift. Marcus sat with his back against the cave wall, his knife in one hand, and watched the entrance. Sleep would come eventually, but for now, adrenaline was keeping him wired. His mind drifted to the data packet the pod had downloaded before landing. Tartarus 9 was larger than Earth with higher gravity. The atmosphere was breathable but acidic enough to cause long-term damage to most species. The local ecosystem was aggressive and adaptable. Weather patterns were violent and unpredictable. The planet had 2 seasons, calm and catastrophic. He had arrived at the beginning of calm season, which lasted approximately 6 standard months. After that came what the data had called the crucible season, when conditions became exponentially worse. 6 months to prepare. 6 months to learn how to not just survive but thrive. 6 months before the planet stopped playing nice and really tried to kill him. Marcus looked down at his chronometer. Day 1, hour 17. He had already lasted longer than the average. A bitter laugh escaped his lips. Such a low bar to clear, and yet here he was, proud of himself for not dying immediately. Outside, something howled. It was answered by something else farther away. The night was filling with noise. A symphony of creatures that had never known humans and did not care about galactic councils or justice or exile. They only knew hunger and territory and survival. Marcus closed his eyes for just a moment, and when he opened them again, the twin suns were rising. He had survived the night. He did not remember falling asleep, but apparently his body had made that decision for him. The vine barrier was intact. Nothing had tried to enter the cave. Day 2 had arrived. He stood up slowly, feeling every bruise and strain. His back was stiff where the ripper worm had hit him. But he was alive. He was functional. He could work with that. Marcus walked to the cave entrance and looked out over the jungle. Somewhere out there, monitoring satellites were recording his life signs, transmitting data back to Unity 7 station. Somewhere out there, Velshara probably expected him to be dead already. Somewhere out there, Ambassador Okonkwo might be hoping he had found a quick end rather than suffering. He picked up a sharp rock and carved a single line into the cave wall near the entrance. Day 1 survived. There would be more lines, many more. He was going to fill this wall with lines, and then he was going to go back to Unity 7 and make Velshara count every single one of them. The jungle below stirred as creatures began their daily routines. Marcus checked his gear, secured his knife, and started planning his day. Find water. Scout the area. Learn the patterns. Adapt. Humans were good at adapting. It was what they did best, and Marcus Chen was about to become very, very good at it. Day 182. Marcus Chen knelt beside the stream, his hands cupped under the flowing water as he checked its clarity against the morning light. The water ran clear and cold, filtering through the layers of volcanic rock he had traced back to its source 3 weeks ago. He had tested it repeatedly with his purification tablets, and while the chemical analysis showed higher mineral content than Earth water, it was drinkable. More importantly, it was reliable. He filled his canteens and stood surveying the territory he had claimed as his own. The cave was now a fortress. The entrance was reinforced with logs cut from the acid-resistant trees he had discovered growing near the volcanic vents. He had woven a door from the toughest vines treated with sap from a plant that hardened like concrete when exposed to air. Inside, the walls were lined with supplies, dried meat from smaller creatures he had trapped, edible roots and fungi he had tested carefully on himself, and tools he had crafted from bone, stone, and scavenged materials. The transformation had not been easy. The first month had been pure survival, a desperate scramble to learn the rules of this world before it killed him. He had been sick twice from eating the wrong plants despite his careful testing. He had been injured a dozen times, from a broken finger when a trap had snapped on his hand to a deep gash on his leg, from a thorned vine that had seemed dead until he grabbed it. But he had learned. More than that, he had adapted. Marcus wore armor now, crude but effective. Plates of chitin harvested from ripper worms he had killed, bound together with treated vine and padded with layers of fungal material that dried into something like leather. He carried a spear, the shaft carved from dense wood and tipped with a blade he had shaped from a ripper worm claw. At his side was still the multi-tool knife, but now it was joined by a collection of other tools, a hand axe, a bone saw, various cutting implements he had made himself. He looked different, too. His hair had grown long and he had tied it back with a strip of leather. His face was leaner, hardened by months of constant physical exertion. His hands were calloused and scarred. He moved differently, with the economical grace of a predator that had learned to waste no energy. The jungle had tried to break him, and instead it had forged him into something harder. The suns were climbing higher, signaling the approach of midday heat. Marcus began his daily routine of checking his trap lines. He had set up a network of snares and pitfalls in a rough circle around his cave, targeting the smaller creatures that served as prey for the larger predators. The meat was stringy and tasted like mushrooms mixed with fish, but it was protein and his body needed it. 3 of his traps had been triggered. 2 held small reptilian creatures that looked like a cross between a lizard and an armadillo. The 3rd trap was empty but destroyed, probably by something bigger that had taken the bait. Marcus reset the traps carefully, always aware of his surroundings. Complacency killed faster than any predator. As he worked, his mind went to the discovery he had made the previous week. Deep in the jungle, nearly a full day's travel from his cave, he had found ruins. They were partially overgrown, consumed by the aggressive vegetation, but unmistakable. Walls of worked stone too precise to be natural, doorways that led into collapsed structures, and symbols, carved into the stone in patterns that spoke of intelligence and purpose. Someone had tried to live here once. Someone had failed. Marcus had spent 2 days exploring the ruins, carefully documenting what he found. Most of the structures were too damaged to reveal much, but in one partially intact building, he had found something remarkable. A data pad. It was old, its casing cracked and covered in mineral deposits. But when he had carefully cleaned it and exposed it to sunlight, the backup power cell had shown the faintest flicker of life. He had brought it back to his cave and spent the last week trying to coax it back to functionality. Last night he had finally succeeded. The pad had booted up, its screen displaying text in a language he did not recognize, but the translation software embedded in his own survival kit had been able to make sense of most of it. The pad belonged to a progenitor research team. The progenitors, the data explained, were an ancient species that had seeded life across the galaxy millions of years ago. They had created worlds like Tartarus 9 as testing grounds, places where evolution could be accelerated and species could be forged in the crucible of extreme survival pressure. But that was not the part that had made Marcus's blood run cold. The pad included a calendar system, and according to its records, the researchers had arrived on Tartarus 9 during calm season. They had established a base. They had begun their studies. They had survived for nearly a full year, and then, 3 weeks before the end of calm season, the entries stopped abruptly. The final entry was just 3 words repeated over and over. The crucible comes. Marcus had read those words and understood. Calm season was the test. The crucible was the judgment. And he was 6 months into a year-long sentence, which meant the crucible was coming. He finished checking his traps and returned to the cave, his mind already planning. The datapad had more information, deeper in its memory banks. There were mentions of technology, of safe zones, of patterns in the planetary cycles. If he could access all of it, he might be able to prepare for whatever the crucible would bring. As he settled into the cave and pulled out the datapad, movement caught his eye from below. Marcus froze, his hand going to his spear. Something was approaching up the cliff face, not climbing, flowing, like liquid metal, catching the light as it moved. Marcus had seen many strange things on Tartarus 9, but this was new. The flowing shape resolved itself into a form as it reached the cave entrance. It was roughly spherical, about the size of his head, made up of thousands of tiny crystalline fragments that moved independently, but maintained cohesion as a whole. When it caught the sunlight, it split the light into rainbows that danced across the cave walls. The thing stopped at the entrance, as if waiting for permission to enter. Marcus kept his spear ready but did not attack. The entity had not shown aggression. It just sat there, pulsing gently with an internal light. "What are you?" Marcus said aloud, not expecting an answer. The crystalline entity vibrated. The vibration carried through the cave floor and up through Marcus's feet. It was not random. It had pattern, rhythm. It was trying to communicate. Marcus slowly lowered his spear and sat down cross-legged, bringing himself to the same level as the entity. He placed his hand flat on the cave floor and felt the vibrations more clearly. They were complex, layered, like multiple frequencies played simultaneously. It reminded him of dolphin songs or whale calls, communication through vibration. He tried tapping his hand on the ground, creating his own vibrations. Simple patterns at first. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps. The entity responded immediately, mimicking his pattern perfectly. Then it added to it, creating a more complex rhythm. Marcus tried to copy it, failed, tried again. They spent an hour like this, learning each other's language. It was crude, but Marcus began to understand basic concepts. The entity was not alone. There were others like it. They lived deep underground in cavern systems that honeycombed the planet. They were aware of Marcus, had been watching him for months. They were curious about him. More than that, they were impressed. The vibrations conveyed something like respect. Marcus had survived where others had not. He had adapted. He had become part of the ecosystem rather than trying to fight against it. In their terms, which Marcus struggled to translate through vibration, he was enduring kind. As the suns began to set, the crystalline entity pulsed once more and began to retreat down the cliff face. But before it left, it did something Marcus had not expected. It split off a small piece of itself about the size of his thumb and left it at the cave entrance. Then it was gone, flowing back down the rock like quicksilver. Marcus picked up the fragment carefully. It was warm to the touch and vibrated constantly with a gentle frequency. He did not know what it meant, but he understood the gesture. Gift, peace offering, token of connection. He placed the fragment carefully on a shelf he had carved into the cave wall and watched it pulse with light as darkness fell outside. For the first time since arriving on Tartarus 9, Marcus felt something other than the constant pressure of survival. He felt hope. The next morning, 3 more crystalline entities were waiting at his cave entrance. They did not approach immediately, but waited for Marcus to acknowledge them. When he sat down and placed his hand on the ground, they flowed forward and began their vibrating communication. The message was urgent. Danger. Change. The pattern of vibrations included images, somehow conveyed through frequency alone, of massive shapes moving beneath the surface, of heat building in the planet's core, of storms gathering in the atmosphere. The crucible was not a metaphor. It was a real physical event. The planet itself was about to transform. Marcus pulled out the progenitor data pad and showed it to the entities. They reacted immediately, their vibrations taking on an excited quality. They knew this device. Their ancestors had interacted with the progenitors. The entities flowed around the pad, and Marcus felt new vibrations, these ones seeming to interface directly with the device's systems. The screen flickered and came fully to life. Data scrolled across it faster than Marcus could read. But the entities were downloading everything, accessing files the pad's damaged systems could not have reached on their own. When they finished, the lead entity turned its vibrations back to Marcus. The message was clear. The progenitor facility was not completely destroyed. Deep beneath the ruins, protected by layers of rock and old technology, was a vault. Inside that vault was equipment designed to survive the crucible. Shelter, tools, perhaps even a way to leave this planet. But the path to the vault was dangerous. It would require traversing territory held by the apex predators of Tartarus 9, creatures even larger and more dangerous than the Ripper worms. It would need to be done before the crucible began, which according to the pad's calculations was less than 3 weeks away. Marcus looked at the 3 crystalline entities, then back at his cave. He had built something here. A safe place, a refuge. Leaving it meant risking everything. But staying meant facing the crucible with only his wits and his homemade tools. The choice was not really a choice at all. All right, he said, speaking both for himself and for the entities. Show me the way. The entities pulsed with what Marcus interpreted as agreement. One of them flowed forward and touched the fragment it had left the night before. The fragment began to pulse in a steady rhythm, a beacon or a compass. Follow this. Marcus spent the rest of the day preparing. He packed his essentials, food, water, medical supplies, tools, and the datapad. He left behind most of his armor, taking only the lightest pieces. Speed and mobility would matter more than protection for this journey. He filled in his trap lines and scattered rocks across them, making them useless. If he did not come back, he did not want any creature to suffer in a trap that would never be checked. As the sun set on day 183, Marcus stood at the cave entrance one last time. He looked at the wall where he had carved 182 lines. each one representing a day survived. He carved number 183, then added something else, a simple symbol, an arrow pointing forward. The crystalline entities waited below, their forms catching the last light of day. Marcus climbed down the cliff face and joined them. Together they set out into the jungle, heading toward the ruins and whatever secrets lay buried beneath them. Behind them, the cave stood empty. Before them, the jungle stretched dark and dangerous. Above them, monitoring satellites recorded a human life sign moving deeper into hostile territory. And far beneath the surface, in the molten heart of Tartarus 9, ancient machines began to wake up. The Crucible was coming, but Marcus Chen was not running from it. He was running toward it, armed with progenitor technology and allied with creatures made of living crystal. The Council had sent him here to die. Instead, he was about to become something they could never have predicted. He was becoming the first human to truly understand what a Deathworld could teach. Day 183 ended with Marcus Chen alive, moving, and more dangerous than he had ever been. The lines carved in the cave wall were not a countdown to death. They were a countdown to judgment. And when that countdown reached day 365, someone was going to have a lot to answer for. Day 287. The polar citadel rose from the ice like a monument to impossible survival. Marcus stood on a platform of ancient metal, watching as the twin suns set over a landscape of crystalline ice formations and volcanic vents that steamed in the freezing air. The journey here had taken months, through territories that had tested every skill he possessed. But he had made it. More than that, he had thrived. The progenitor facility was far more intact than the jungle ruins had suggested. Built into the side of a polar mountain, it had survived millions of years through a combination of advanced engineering and strategic location. The Crucible season storms broke against the mountain's bulk, and the volcanic activity beneath provided heat and power. The progenitors had chosen well. Marcus had spent the last several weeks learning the facility's systems, aided by the crystalline swarm. There were 17 of them now, entities that had joined him on the journey from the jungle. They called themselves the Resonance, and they had welcomed Marcus into their collective with an enthusiasm he found both touching and slightly overwhelming. The progenitor AI had recognized them immediately, had addressed them as fellow children of the Forge. That had been an interesting revelation. The Resonants were not native to Tartarus 9. They were progenitor creations, designed to thrive in the extreme conditions of Deathworlds and to maintain the testing grounds long after their creators had moved on. Over millions of years, they had evolved their own culture, their own understanding of purpose. They had been waiting for someone worthy to arrive, someone like Marcus. The AI itself had been another surprise. Marcus had expected a cold, logical machine intelligence. What he got was something that seemed almost amused by his presence. The progenitor who programmed this AI had given it a personality, complete with what Marcus could only describe as a sense of humor. It called itself Forge Keeper, and it had been testing Marcus since the moment he stepped into the facility. The tests had been subtle at first. Equipment that malfunctioned at critical moments, forcing improvisation. Doors that sealed, requiring him to find alternate routes. Food synthesizers that produced increasingly unpleasant rations. Marcus had complained about that last one until the AI had finally laughed. A sound like wind chimes, and admitted it had been curious to see how much a human would tolerate before breaking. Marcus had responded by eating the worst ration without complaint, maintaining eye contact with the nearest sensor, and asking for seconds. The AI had declared him satisfactorily stubborn, and stopped sabotaging his meals. Now, standing on the observation platform, Marcus felt the wind pick up. The polar night was approaching, a period of 72 hours when both suns would be below the horizon. During that time, the temperature would drop to levels that could freeze unprotected flesh in seconds. But Marcus was not unprotected anymore. He wore a suit of adaptive armor synthesized from progenitor technology. It looked organic, almost like a second skin, but it was harder than the toughest alloy and could regulate his temperature across extreme ranges. Weapons were embedded in the suit's systems, energy projectors in the palms, force generators that could create shields or shockwaves, and a sophisticated sensor array that gave him awareness of his surroundings in all directions simultaneously. The Forge Keeper had been clear when it provided the technology. This was not a gift. It was an acknowledgement. Marcus had passed the trials. He had survived the jungle, the journey, and the countless tests. He had proven himself worthy of the tools that would let him not just survive the crucible, but master it. You understand what comes next, the AI's voice said from speakers embedded in the platform. The crucible begins in 3 days. The planet will transform. Temperature extremes, seismic activity, atmospheric storms. Nothing that cannot adapt will survive. You can remain here, sheltered in this facility, and wait out the season in safety. But, Marcus said, knowing there was more. But that would waste your potential, the AI continued. You have become something rare, Marcus Chen. You have become enduring kind, as the resonance names it. Humans have a different word. Apex. You are an apex survivor, forged by this world. The crucible is the final test. Face it, and you will emerge as something this galaxy has never seen. Marcus looked down at his hands at the subtle shimmer of the progenitor armor. And if I fail, then I will note in my logs that a human survived 287 days on a Class X Deathworld, longer than any other recorded species. Your achievement will be remembered even if you are not there to claim it. You're not very reassuring, you know that. The AI made its wind chime laugh. I was not programmed for reassurance. I was programmed to forge survivors. And you, Marcus Chen, are the finest raw material I have worked with in 6 million years. Do not waste it by seeking comfort. Marcus smiled despite himself. The AI was right. He had not come this far by playing it safe. He had survived by pushing forward, by adapting, by refusing to accept failure. The crucible was not his end. It was his graduation. Show me the data, he said. I want to know everything. The platform's floor lit up with holographic projections. Marcus watched as the AI displayed the crucible season in detail. It was not just weather. It was a complete planetary transformation. The volcanic vents would erupt simultaneously, filling the atmosphere with ash and toxic gases. The magnetic field would intensify, creating electrical storms of incredible violence. The temperature would swing wildly, from flash-freezing cold to searing heat sometimes within hours. And the creatures, the predators that normally competed for territory, would be driven to migration patterns that would bring them all together in concentrated zones. It was apocalyptic. It was designed to kill everything that could not adapt fast enough to the changes, and Marcus had 3 days to prepare. He spent those days learning everything the progenitor facility could teach him. The armor's full capabilities, including systems he had not even known existed, advanced survival techniques optimized for extreme environments, tactical data on the predators, their behaviors during the crucible, and their weaknesses, and something the AI called resonance linking, a way to coordinate directly with the crystalline swarm, sharing awareness and reactions faster than any verbal communication could achieve. The resonance taught him their history during this time. They had watched species come and go on Tartarus 9 for longer than human civilization had existed. Most died quickly. Some lasted weeks. A very few lasted months. None had lasted a full cycle except the resonance themselves, and they were built for this world. Marcus was the first organic being to reach this point in millions of years. You could stay here, one of the resonance vibrated to him on the eve of the crucible. The facility is safe. You have proven enough. Marcus shook his head. I was sent here to die as an example. If I hide in a bunker for 6 months and then leave, all they'll say is that I got lucky, found some old tech, and waited it out. But if I face the crucible and survive, if I walk through the worst this planet can throw at me and come out the other side? He paused, feeling the weight of his decision. Then they can't dismiss what I've done. Then they have to acknowledge that humans are not weak, that we belong in this galaxy as equals, not as subjects to be judged and punished. The resonance pulsed with understanding. Then we will face it with you. You are enduring kind. You are pack-bonded. This is the human way, yes? Marcus felt something catch in his throat. Pack-bonded. The aliens always wondered about that human trait, the way humans would form intense loyalty bonds with anything that showed them kindness. He had pack-bonded with creatures made of living crystal on a world designed to kill him. It was absurd. It was beautiful. It was incredibly human. Yeah, he said quietly. This is the human way. The crucible began at dawn on day 290. The first sign was the sky. The normal yellow-green of Tartarus 9's atmosphere turned a deep red, like blood mixed with rust. Then the first volcanic eruption shook the mountain, a low rumble that built to a roar. Lava fountained from vents across the visible landscape, painting the ice with rivers of molten rock. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in 10 minutes as ash began to block the sunlight. Then it spiked 30 degrees as superheated air rushed in from the volcanic zones. The wind picked up, carrying sand and ice crystals that could strip flesh from bone. Lightning arced between clouds, purple and white, branching across the sky in patterns too regular to be natural. The planet's magnetic field was active, channeling energy. Marcus stood on the observation platform, his armor automatically adjusting to each temperature shift. The resonance clustered around him, their crystalline forms reflecting the chaos of the sky. The Forge Keeper's voice was calm in his ear. The first wave has begun. You have 30 seconds before this platform becomes untenable. I suggest you move to the prepared shelter. Marcus did not move. He was watching something in the distance, a massive shape moving through the ash clouds. It was bigger than anything he had seen in the jungle, bigger than a building, its silhouette backlit by lava flows. As he watched, it opened what might have been a mouth and released a call that shook the mountain. Other calls answered from different directions. The apex predators were moving. The Crucible was not just a weather event. It was a convergence, a time when the planet's most dangerous inhabitants all came together. For what purpose the progenitor data had not been clear, but Marcus was going to find out. I'm not hiding, he said to the AI, not from this. If I want the Council to take me seriously, I need to do more than survive. I need to prove that humans can not only endure the worst this universe offers, but come back stronger. The AI was silent for a moment. Then its wind chime laugh rang out over the roar of the storm. Then I will observe with great interest, Marcus Chen. You are either the greatest survivor I have encountered, or the most magnificently foolish. Time will tell which. Marcus activated his armor's full systems and felt power surge through him. The resonance linked with him, their consciousness touching his, creating a network of shared awareness. He could feel what they felt, see what they saw, react with their speed and his adaptability combined. He looked out at the transformed landscape, at the Crucible in all its terrible glory, and smiled. This was what the Council had sentenced him to. This was their idea of execution. They had given him their worst, and he had turned it into his crucible, his forge, his graduation. Day 290, he said, recording a message on the datapad that would automatically upload to the monitoring satellites. The Crucible has begun. To Judge Velshara and the Council, if you're watching, class is in session. And this human? He's about to earn his degree. Then he stepped off the platform and into the storm, the resonance flowing around him like a shield of living light. The Crucible season had come to Tartarus 9. And for the first time in its ancient history, someone was not running from it. Someone was running toward it, weapons hot and ready to teach this Deathworld the most important lesson about humanity. They did not break. They bent, they adapted, they evolved, and when the trial was over, they came back for judgment. The real judgment was about to begin. Day 365. The vessel that appeared on Unity 7 sensors should not have existed. It was broadcasting identification codes that were older than most of the species on the Council, progenitor authentication protocols that had not been active for millions of years. The station's defense systems did not know whether to target it or bow to it. In the Council emergency chamber, 43 species representatives scrambled to understand what was happening. The vessel was requesting docking clearance and demanding an immediate session of the full Council. It was not asking. It was invoking ancient laws that technically superseded the Council's own authority, laws written by the progenitors themselves and encoded into the foundation of galactic civilization. Judge Arbitrator Velshara felt something she had not experienced in decades: fear. She knew, with absolute certainty, what that vessel carried, or rather who it carried. It's impossible, she said to the other Council members via the emergency channel. The monitoring satellites showed his life signs active, yes, but the Crucible season ended only 2 days ago. Even with progenitor shelter, no organic being could survive the convergence. The data must be corrupted. Ambassador Kira Okonkwo stood in the observation gallery, her hands pressed against the transparent aluminum of the viewing port. She could see the vessel now, a sleek craft that seemed to shift colors as it moved, adapting to the background like a chameleon. It was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at, as if human eyes were not quite equipped to process its design. "That's him," she whispered. "He actually did it." The Kravik ambassador, a warrior species that had always viewed humans with cautious respect, made a rumbling sound of approval. If a human emerges from that vessel alive, the Council will have no choice. Ancient law is clear. Trial by ordeal supersedes all modern judgments. Your Marcus Chen will have earned his freedom by the oldest rights we recognize. Velshara wanted to argue, but she could not. The law was indeed clear. If someone sentenced to a death world survived a full solar cycle of that world, their sentence was void. It was a law so old that most considered it purely theoretical, a relic from a more brutal age when survival itself was considered proof of innocence. No one had invoked it in recorded history because no one had ever survived long enough to invoke it. Until now. The vessel docked with a soft magnetic seal. There was a hiss of equalizing pressure, and then the airlock opened. What emerged made several council members physically recoil. Marcus Chen no longer looked entirely human. The progenitor armor had bonded with him so completely that it was hard to tell where his body ended and the technology began. His skin had a faint metallic sheen, and his eyes glowed with a soft blue light. He moved with a grace that seemed almost liquid, each step precise and controlled. Behind him flowed the resonance, 3 crystalline entities that caught the station's lights and turned them into cascading rainbows. But it was the weapon he carried that truly terrified them. It was not a modern firearm or energy weapon. It was a spear, the shaft carved from the bone of a creature that looked big enough to swallow a shuttle hole, the tip shaped from volcanic glass that still glowed with inner heat. It was primitive, and advanced all at once, a weapon that had been forged in conditions that would kill most species instantly. Marcus Chen looked like a warrior from a prehistoric myth, armored in impossible technology and carrying proof of battles that should not have been survivable. He looked, in short, exactly like what the galaxy's worst nightmares described when they warned their children about the humans from Earth. He walked through the corridors of Unity 7 Station and people fled before him. Not because he threatened anyone, but because he radiated danger the way a star radiates heat. Every movement, every breath, every flicker of those glowing eyes spoke of someone who had looked death in the face for a full year and made death blink first. The council chamber doors opened automatically, recognizing the progenitor authentication codes he carried. Marcus stepped inside, and the room fell silent. All 43 species representatives were present, along with observers from a dozen more species that had heard about this session and demanded to witness it. The gallery was packed with diplomats, reporters, and the simply curious. Marcus walked to the center of the chamber, to the exact spot where he had stood a year ago when Velshara had sentenced him. He drove the base of his spear into the floor with a crack that echoed through the chamber. The resonance took positions around him, and their combined presence created a low vibration that everyone could feel in their bones. "I am Marcus Chen," he said, his voice amplified by the progenitor armor's systems. "Human, captain, and as of today, survivor of 1 full solar cycle on Tartarus 9, I invoke the ancient right of trial by ordeal. My survival nullifies my sentence. I am here to make that official." Velshara's pod drifted forward, her 3 eyes narrowed. "You may have survived, human, but that does not change what you did. You violated the non-interference directive. You disrupted lawful commerce. Your survival, while remarkable, does not erase your crime." Marcus smiled, and it was not a kind smile. "No, it doesn't erase my crime. But it does prove something important. It proves that your judgment was flawed. You sentenced me to death because you believed humans were reckless, violent, and unable to think beyond immediate emotional responses. You believed we were too dangerous to be trusted with freedom in the galaxy. You were wrong." He gestured, and one of the resonance entities flowed forward. It projected a hologram into the center of the chamber, images from Marcus's year on Tartarus 9. The council watched in silence as the footage played. Marcus fighting, Ripper worms, building his fortress, discovering the progenitor facility, surviving the crucible season. But Marcus had not shown them the dramatic moments of combat. Instead, he showed them the quiet moments. Him carefully testing plants to determine which were edible. Him sitting with the resonance, learning to communicate. Him treating an infected, wound with material synthesized from local resources. Him solving problems, adapting, learning, and growing. I spent 365 days on a planet designed to kill everything that lands on it, Marcus said. And you know what I learned? I learned that survival isn't about being the biggest or the strongest or having the best weapons. It's about being adaptable. It's about learning from your environment. It's about making allies instead of enemies when you can. These are not the traits of a reckless, violent species. These are the traits of a species that has earned its place in the galaxy. He pulled out the data pad, the progenitor device he had discovered in the ruins. I also learned something else. I learned that you've been using Tartarus 9 as an execution method for centuries. I found records, Judge Velshara, logs from previous exiles, 63 individuals over the last 400 years, all sent to die on that world for crimes ranging from political dissent to asking too many questions about council operations. The chamber erupted in noise. Council members began arguing, their translators creating a cacophony of competing voices. Velshara tried to speak, but Marcus raised his hand, and the progenitor armor amplified his voice to override all of them. Ancient law gives me the right to present evidence, he said. And I have evidence. The progenitor AI, Forge Keeper, has provided me with complete records. Tartarus 9 was never meant to be a prison. It was a testing ground, a place where species could prove their worth. By turning it into an execution site, you violated progenitor law. Laws that, I remind you, still supersede your own authority. A new voice entered the chamber, transmitted through the progenitor systems in Marcus's armor. It was the Forge Keeper, its wind chime tones translated into all the languages present simultaneously. I am Forge Keeper, AI Administrator of Test World Tartarus 9. I confirm Marcus Chen's testimony. This world was designated as a crucible for forging worthy species. Its use as an execution site is a violation of my core directives and of the foundational laws established by my creators. I recognize Marcus Chen as the first individual in 6 million years to complete the full trial. By ancient law, he is granted status as forge-proven, with all rights and privileges that designation carries. The Kravik ambassador rose to his feet, his massive form dominating his section of the chamber. I move that we immediately nullify Marcus Chen's sentence and censure, Judge Arbitrator Velshara for abuse of judicial authority. Furthermore, I move that Tartarus 9 be removed from use as a penal colony and returned to its original purpose. Voices rose in support. The warrior species, the ones who understood the value of a trial, survived, backed the motion immediately. Others, the more cautious species, began calculating the political cost of opposing it. Ancient law was ancient law. Denying it would undermine the entire foundation of the Council's authority. Ambassador Okonkwo spoke from the gallery, her voice clear and strong. I second the motion, and I further move that Captain Marcus Chen be offered reinstatement with full honors and compensation for wrongful imprisonment. The vote was called. It was not unanimous. Velshara and her closest allies voted against it, unwilling to admit fault. But the majority was clear. 78% of the council voted in favor. Marcus Chen's sentence was void. Velshara was censured and removed from her position, and Tartarus 9 was to be returned to its original purpose, though what that purpose would be in practice remained to be determined. Marcus stood in the center of the chamber as the votes were tallied and made official. He felt the weight of the year lift from his shoulders, but not completely. He had survived. He had won his freedom, but the fight was not over. When the chamber had finally quieted, Marcus spoke again. I appreciate the council's judgment, but I'm not here just for myself. I'm here because what happened to me could happen to any human, anytime you decide we're too inconvenient to deal with. I'm here because the galaxy needs to understand something about my species. He pulled off his helmet, revealing his face for the first time. It was scarred, weathered, and marked by the year of hardship. But his eyes were clear and focused. You think of Earth as a paradise world. Class M, you call it. Safe, easy, but you don't understand what Earth really is. It's a death world too, just a slower one. We've got predators that hunt in packs, diseases that can wipe out populations, weather that can level cities, and natural disasters that reshape continents. We survived all of that. We thrived in all of that, and we did it without progenitor technology or ancient AI guides. We did it with nothing but our brains, our hands, and our refusal to quit. He looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of as many representatives as he could. You can keep seeing us as dangerous. You can keep trying to limit us, control us, or punish us when we don't follow your rules. But understand this. Every time you challenge a human, every time you tell us something is impossible, every time you try to break us, you're just making us stronger. That's what we do. That's what we've always done. We take your worst and turn it into our best. He picked up his spear and turned toward the exit. I declined the council's offer of reinstatement. I don't want to be a cargo hauler anymore. Instead, I'm accepting the title of Forge Proven and everything that comes with it. I'm going to be Earth's Deathworld liaison, and I'm going to teach other humans how to turn impossible planets into homes. Velshara found her voice one last time. You would weaponize this? You would turn more humans into what you have become? Marcus looked back at her and smiled. I'm not weaponizing anything. I'm just teaching. Teaching humans that the galaxy is full of opportunities if you're willing to work for them. Teaching them that death worlds are not prisons or execution sites. They're challenges. And humans love challenges. He walked out of the chamber, the resonance flowing behind him. As he left, he could hear the arguments starting, the debates about what his new role would mean, the concerns about humans spreading to worlds previously considered uninhabitable. Good. Let them worry. Let them understand that humanity was not going to be limited by their fear. Ambassador Okonkwo caught up with him in the corridor. She looked at him with tears in her eyes and pulled him into a hug that he returned carefully, aware of his strength. You did it, she said. You actually survived. I had good motivation, Marcus replied. Couldn't let them get away with thinking they could just get rid of humans when we became inconvenient. She pulled back and looked at him seriously. What now, really? Marcus thought about the progenitor technology stored on his vessel, about the knowledge he had gained from Forgekeeper, about the Resonance who had chosen to come with him as allies and friends, about Earth waiting for him to return with gifts from the galaxy's darkest corner. Now, he said, now I go home, and I show humanity what I learned. The galaxy is afraid of us? Good, fear breeds respect. But more than that, I'm going to show them what humans can become when we stop trying to fit into their comfortable boxes and start embracing the challenges that made us what we are. 3 months later, the first human Deathworld colonization training facility opened in the Amazon rainforest on Earth. It was built using progenitor technology and advised by the Forgekeeper AI, who had agreed to serve as humanity's guide to the ancient knowledge. Marcus Chen stood before the first class of recruits, men and women from every nation on Earth, all of them volunteering to learn how to survive and thrive on worlds others considered impossible. The Resonants were there too, having established a colony on Earth and becoming humanity's first true alien allies. The galaxy thinks death worlds are punishments, Marcus told his students. They think these worlds are where species go to die. We're going to prove them wrong. We're going to show them that death worlds are not obstacles. They're opportunities. And humans? We eat opportunities for breakfast. Behind him, a holographic display showed a star map. Red dots marked Class X death worlds, planets considered completely hostile to life. There were thousands of them scattered across the galaxy, all of them unclaimed because no species had been able to survive on them. Until now. Pick your worlds, Marcus said, his smile fierce and proud. Because humanity is done asking permission to exist in this galaxy. We're going to take the planets no one else wants and we're going to turn them into homes. And when we're done, when we've spread across every impossible world in this galaxy, the Council is going to have to acknowledge the truth. He held up his spear, the weapon forged in the crucible of Tartarus 9, and the recruits echoed his movement with their own training weapons. Humans don't fear the crucible, Marcus said, his voice ringing across the training ground. We become it. That's not just my story. That's humanity's story, and it's just beginning. Above Earth, the progenitor vessel waited in orbit, ready to carry the first wave of human colonists to worlds that had defeated every other species that tried to claim them. The galaxy was about to learn what humans could do when you gave them a challenge instead of a comfort. The Council had tried to execute one human to make an example. Instead, they had created a legend, and legends, Marcus had learned, had a way of inspiring others to impossible achievements. The dead man had returned for judgment, and the judgment was this. Humanity was ready to take its place as not just another species in the galactic community, but as the species that thrived where others failed. The Council had given them one death world as an execution. Humanity was about to claim them all as birthrights. Day 365 had ended, Day one of humanity's new era had begun, and Marcus Chen, forge-proven, stood ready to lead his species into the crucible and beyond.